I just came out of a relationship and felt like some casual dating will be fun, so I went on to Tinder. I made it clear to a few people I actually matched with and spoke to that I wasn't wanting anything serious, just a dinner date or a pub night here and there. I matched with a really cute person. Let's call him Pete. He had just moved to my city and also wasn't looking for anything serious. He just moved to meet some people and see some local spots. The first night we met up was at a well-known bar. I chose this place because I had a few friends that were waitresses and bar staff there, so I felt safe meeting a stranger here. He was on time, we had nice chats, really cool guy on the first impression. We spoke about work, to which he responded that he's a software developer, but he just started his freelancing career. We spoke about where he stays now, that he's moved up here, and he said he's sharing a place with some friends. Rent is quite pricey in the city, so it made sense to me. He asked where I live. I told him that I'm lucky to have my own one-bedroom apartment in quite a nice and popular part of town, mostly thanks to my parents that helped me save and gave me a proportion of the deposit money for my 21st birthday, which I invested and grew up until I had enough to put down a decent deposit myself. He then offered to drop me off at my house, but I said no. I'd prefer to Uber home by myself. He asked if this was because I'm gonna go meet someone else after him. I laughed because I genuinely thought this was a joke. The next time I saw Pete was about 3 days later. He said he knew it was fast, but he actually couldn't stop thinking about me, and he wanted to see me again. This time, we met at a different restaurant, also one I chose because I went to school with the owner and knew all the staff pretty well. The place is a bit more pricey, and he got super annoyed with me for ordering as much as I did. I couldn't understand why, since I insisted on paying for my own stuff both times we met. That night, same story, let me drop you off at home please. Again, I said no. While we're in the middle of this conversation, he gets a call. He stepped away, but I could still hear a fair amount. No, I think I'm gonna stay with you again. Yeah, I'm with her. Don't worry about it. Okay, I'll be home soon. So now I think he's chatting with his roommate, or maybe his mom, but I don't ask. He comes back to our table. Please, I insist, bad things are happening. Two ladies that Uber home this late by themselves. I'd feel better if I dropped you off. Not having the energy to argue, I tell him fine, and I put my address into his GPS. As soon as he got home, he messages me and tells me he'll be picking me up in the morning to go for a picnic. I reply that I actually have cleaning to do, but again, he insists that he'll see me at 10. Come 10 a.m. that next morning, best believe he's right outside my apartment. I get into his car and he leans over to kiss my cheek. I notice that his breath stinks. Obviously, I'm a little grossed out. We have our picnic and it's quite nice. By about 4 p.m., I tell him that I really want to go home, and the park we went to was about an hour and a half drive from my apartment, so I couldn't really Uber back home since it would cost a fortune. He agrees it's time to go, so we get into his car and we're off. I fell asleep in his car on the drive back. When I woke up, he asked if we should finish the rest of the drinks we had at the picnic at my apartment. I said to him I don't want to, and he just snaps. He raised his voice and said something along the lines of, "What are you hiding from me? Just be honest. Why are you so desperate to keep me off your apartment?" I was so confused, I actually just kept quiet. He dropped me off, but I could see his car across the street from my apartment for about half an hour before he actually left. About 5 minutes after he left, he let me know he's home and safe, and he thinks he's starting to fall for me. So naturally I'm freaked out because I made it clear I didn't want anything serious, and he said he felt the same. I said to him, if that's the case, I think we should take a break from hanging out with each other. About 5 days later, he messaged me and asks if we can go for dinner again. He found a Indian restaurant he knows I'll love. I tell him it's cool, he should just send me the address. He tells me he'll pick me up. So 7 p.m. comes, he tells me he's downstairs, and as I go down to meet him, he's standing at my gate. I press the remote control to open the gate, and he walked inside to meet me. "Show me which one is yours. I'd love to see how you live." Not "hi," not "how are you." That's his opening line. So now I'm naturally unsettled. I say to him that I'm starving. Could we go out for dinner and I'll show my place after we eat? At dinner, he gets a call again. This time he didn't step away. "Pete, yeah, I don't know. I can let you know by 10. He then turns to me and asks, am I staying at your house tonight? Me. No, I don't know. I've work tomorrow. Pete to me. Yes, me too. I could sleep on the couch, and we can go out again tomorrow. Then back to the caller. I'll let you know, okay? Caller. No, you're not. Can you just get your things, please? Please. Pete. And do what with them? Caller. Take them to that girl you're seeing. I'm done asking you. Now I'm sitting here in absolute shock and terror. What in the hell is going on here? Our food arrives and we barely speak. I say to him, why did you ask me if you could sleep over at my house? He then spins this story about how he wants to hang out and, again, see how I live. I then tell him very frankly that I don't like having strangers in my apartment. He gets very touched and the bill arrives. As per usual, I pay for myself, he pays for himself. I say to him I'll get an Uber home, and he says, what's the use? I already know where you live, let me drop you off. By now, I've already decided that this will be the last time I see him. I get into his car and reach for my jumper that I threw in the back when he fetched me. I notice a bag in the back of the car, full of clothes and toiletries, as well as a pillow. I don't think much of it. I don't personally drive or own a car, but I know my sister always has the most random crap in the back of her seat. On the way home, he's dead quiet when he suddenly says, do you know how selfish you are? I've had no issue driving you around, but you don't want me to sleep over at your house? I say to him that I've never had an issue with Ubering, and if he's so touched, I also have no issue with paying him what the Ubers would have cost me. I'm over this and I'm not playing nice anymore. His phone rings again. Caller. Your stuff is at the security boom at the gate, Pete. Stay with your girlfriend or stay with your mom. You're screwed for taking advantage of everyone like this. Pete, I don't speak to my mom, you know this, you ass. And then hangs up. Now I think this is maybe an ex-girlfriend that he needs to collect things from. Before I've even had a chance to process what's happening, he turned to me and starts yelling, I've nowhere to go, are you happy? You spoiled brat, living off mommy and daddy's money, getting driven around by me like I work for you. My whole body got stiff with fear. I don't know if I'm gonna cry or throw up. In my head, I'm just planning how I'm going to grab my bag the second he stops and run straight to the cafe under my apartment. If you run through the cafe, you get to the gate that takes you to the back part of my apartment, and it works with fingerprint access. There wasn't time to still find my keys in my bag, and I didn't want the main gate I normally use to open wide enough for him to get in. He stops at my apartment, and as planned, I jump out, run to the cafe, run out of the back, through the little gate, and up to the second floor. My apartment is on the 4th floor, and I hammered on the neighbor's door. I went inside and told her and her husband everything that happened, and asked if they would mind calling the cafe to explain why I ran through with no explanation and in such a state. I blocked Pete and haven't seen him since. I'm still not sure what his case was. From what I gathered, he was basically homeless, and I think he wanted to get into my apartment to maybe sleep over there for a while. I'm not sure if the girl that kept calling him was also a Tinder date that let him into her apartment and he just never left. All I know is that he scared the living daylights out of me, and I never ever want to see him again. This happened to me my freshman year of college. Tinder was new and everyone at my university was on the app. I joined to see what all the fuss was about. Looking through profiles, I found a few guys that were really interesting, and one guy caught my eye in particular. We will call him Walter. I swiped right and we matched. I was excited and kinda giddy because he was super attractive. He messages me and I got butterflies in my stomach. We messaged each other on the app for maybe an hour. Typical conversations. I asked him what he did for a living and he asked me what my major was. Harmless conversations. After a while, he asked for my number number so we could text instead of message on the app. I gave it to him. He seemed nice enough. We messaged back and forth for a few days. There were lots of flirty conversation, and then we finally made plans to hang out. And by the 4th day of conversation, he started calling me babe, which gave me mixed feelings. It was cute, but also a little weird. We didn't really know each other and never met yet. I ignored it and continued on with the conversation. He started saying he wanted to be exclusive and really wanted to see me in person. He was begging me at this point to come to his apartment to watch movies with him and his dog. I told him that our first meetup needed to be in public. I would not be going to some stranger's apartment. He said I was overreacting and kept begging. I ignored him for the rest of the night. The next day he apologized and said he understood we needed to meet in public, so we made plans the next weekend. The weekend came faster than I expected, and it was the day we were supposed to meet. Something just felt off and I decided to back out. I texted him apologizing, saying my mom wasn't feeling well and needed me to come home and help her with some house chores. This made him annoyed, and he said, "Your mom is a big girl. If she needs you, she can just call you. Now just come over and you can leave whenever you need to go help her. I really want to see you." I told him no, that I would be staying with my mom that weekend, and that was that. I only lived about 30 minutes from home, so I actually did go home to see my mom that day. After what he said about my mom, I started ignoring him, and the texts started rolling in. Text ever text, "Babe, I'm so sorry, please come over. Babe, I miss you. Are you coming over still?" I planned on replying the next day that I was just busy with my mom. Then he started calling me. I had a total of 45 missed phone calls within a 2-hour period. He left voicemails saying he was sorry and he missed me and wanted me to call him back. Similar voicemails continued almost the entire time I was home. My roommate texted me shortly after I finished dinner with my mom and asked if we could go out that night. I agreed and went back to my university dorm. Suddenly, the calls from Walter started to increase again. More texts, more voicemails, and he started messaging me again on Tinder, asking why I wasn't replying to him. I wasn't planning on replying until I got a message on Instagram that said, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming back to town tonight?" Getting this message really freaked me out. I replied to him and said, "Sorry, I've been busy with my mom. How did you know I was back in town?" He said, "Well, I checked your Tinder, of course. Tinder doesn't tell exact locations, but has a within 1 mile message." This really freaked me out, and I messaged him back and said that he was being really creepy and he seriously had to be constantly refreshing my profile to see the distance change. The messages, calls, and voicemails continued. All were him now apologizing for making me feel weird about him knowing where I was. He was just worried about me. We had been texting for less than a full week. I told my roommate about it, and so we decided to stay in that night. The last straw for me was getting a message saying, "Look, I'm really sorry. I'm outside your dorm with flowers and chocolates. Please forgive me." Oh hell no. I called campus security and told them about the guy, and they never found anyone waiting outside of the dorms. I'm assuming he was in his car waiting for me to reply. I blocked him on all socials, his phone number, deleted Tinder, and have never been back on since. I have seen him once out and about in town, but he never recognized me, thankfully. Walter, if you ever read this, I'm glad we never met. Thanks for making me second guess every single guy I find attractive. Let's never meet again. I was 21 and recently became a police officer and was also recently dumped, so my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old new cop, I had the "I'm invincible and can take on anything" mentality. I matched with a very good-looking out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at the stars and hang out at, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came. I was excited and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field and it looked nice. open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife in the field. Then I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then a van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and went to the van. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on and if he could back his car up a bit. He was very polite about it. He said he was the owner of the property and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told us he'd been having some trouble with poachers on his property and wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting anything. I assured him we only come to look at the stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that and told me to have a nice date and drove away. After that, the girl was texting nonstop. Around an hour later, we saw headlights coming towards us again. This time, at a really fast pace. We hopped into the car and I moved it into a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. The girl hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was screwed. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge at me and knocked me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get on his back and get up. I saw my quote date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and my truck and I wouldn't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and said they didn't want to hurt me. The guy then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop and drew my concealed firearm and told them to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911 and tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone with the police, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window at that point. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding, didn't give me any crap about it at all. Most used words were dumbass and stupid damn rookie. I hopped in the car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they started getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found some hard drugs right at the center console and then searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went back to the van and opened up the trunk, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, and a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. And in the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood, but the plates had been stolen, and the van was reported stolen though. I still get crap about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again, ever. This is possibly one of the weirdest things to ever happen to me, and a throwaway seems like a good idea when telling it. I just moved to London, and being a bit lonely and wanting to get into the dating scene, I tried to do the whole Tinder thing. It was alright. I honestly wasn't too active on it. I checked my account a few times a week, and messaged some profiles of girls I thought were pretty. 95% of the time my messages would go unanswered. I'd guess it was mostly because many of the messages in retrospect were pretty uncreative and dry. One day, I was messing around, looking through various profiles when I saw an extremely attractive girl, and decided I had to message her. In my opinion, she was a perfect 10. Not just the fact that she was a glorious blonde, but we liked a lot of the same music and movies, and well, I could actually send her a decent message because of all the things we had in common. I also need to reiterate that her pictures were smoking, which most likely clouded my judgment. I should also mention that I'm a former military and an Afghanistan veteran, so nothing really scares me. Almost immediately after pressing send, she responded. We messaged each other through the Tinder Messenger service for about a week, and I got to learn a lot about her. Her name was Aoife, and she was from Belfast. She told me she had a daughter named Rosen, which didn't really bother me, and had a very long complicated story about how she grew up a Catholic in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and was orphaned at a young age. She seemed really driven and had such an amazing story. I had so many questions and in all reality a lot of respect for her, so it was really easy to keep talking to her. Within another week we started talking on the phone and then sometimes on Skype. She'd never do an actual video chat, which at the time I didn't think was too weird, but she'd send me pictures of her and her daughter, friends, etc. For the most part, this whole thing seemed legit. The stories she had were pretty detailed, and she was talking about stuff that I really don't know a lot about, and honestly could not comprehend. Then, there were parts of the story that seemed kinda weird, and didn't add up. At first, she told me she was a hairstylist at some place in central London. I don't really go around central a lot, so okay, no biggie. I just met her online. I wasn't going to head into Central to stalk her at work. She then said she owned a bar in Camden called the Lock Tavern, which I looked up on the internet and it is a real place, and managed it on weekends. She had detailed stories about the bouncers and regulars, etc. This didn't seem to make a lot of sense, but okay. I mean, I guess you could do both jobs and be a full-time mom. It seemed odd, but she seemed driven, and she also seemed really hot, so who was I to judge? Again, I wasn't going to be super creeper and pop down there. I just took her word for it. She also said she lived in a really nice penthouse near Covent Garden, which, if anyone knows the London real estate market, didn't seem plausible on a hairdresser/barmaid's wages. She explained this by saying that she'd fallen into some money after the Troubles. It seemed kind of far-fetched, but again, without actually meeting her, who am I to judge? I started to notice some other weird things. She'd send me pictures, and in some of them, certain tattoos were present, and some they weren't. I figured she was just sending old pictures, but I remember that is what started to tip me off that things were fishy, to say the least. But again, there's nothing really wrong with sending old pictures, and I had no real reason not to believe the photos were of Aoife. They all seemed like the same girl, with the exception of the tattoos and some small changes in hair color. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. She would also send me pictures of her daughter Rosen, whom she claimed was 14. Finally, after talking to Aoife for a few weeks online, I asked her out on a date. I'd figured it was time I finally meet her. We're set to meet up on a Friday night, and on that Friday, she doesn't respond to a single text or call. I had nowhere to meet her at. By around 9 p.m., she texted me saying things got out of control at her pub, and she was really sorry she had to cancel. I was upset and should have bailed there, but I forgave her, and we agreed to set up another first meeting. Things from here really started to get weird. As I said, I was doing the online dating thing, and in this time, I'd met a few other girls. Another girl named Jo had asked me out, who turned out to be a psychopath, but that's just because she had an uncontrollable temper, and is nothing interesting enough to put on this subreddit. I went out with Jo one night in an area of London called Shoreditch, which isn't too far from where Aoife's pub was. While I was out, Aoife called and texted me a few times. I basically just ignored the calls. When the date was over, I said bye to Jo and went home and called Aoife. She asked where I was, and basically, well, I lied. I said I was out with a friend. Aoife didn't say anything, and we talked on the phone for a bit, and then said goodnight. The situation got strange a few nights later when Aoife caught me in my lie. She claimed she knew I was out with another girl. She knew which restaurant I was at, and even the night I'd been there. She even knew what Jo looked like. Aoife claimed that one of the bouncers from her pub knew what I looked like because she had shown him photos and he recognized me. When I came in through the doors in the restaurant in Shoreditch, this didn't make a lot of sense because I didn't see any bouncers at the restaurant we were at, but maybe he was bartending or something. I don't know. She had details and they were all spot on. This was odd to say the least. I basically told Aoife that day was set up before I'd even met her and that we weren't really dating, so she had no right to be upset. Plus, she stood me up, so if anyone should be mad, it's me. To be honest, I forgot what really happened in this part of the story. I think we fought for a bit, didn't talk for a few weeks. Then one night, she called me really late. It seemed off, so I answered. She had been panicking, from what I could tell. She was suffering from sleep paralysis, which I know is scary, so I stayed on the phone with her until she went back to sleep. This happened a few more times. I really had no intention to date or even see her. I went home to the US for about a month, and while we did keep limited contact, there was nothing too serious, and my expectations were pretty low. After I had gotten back to London, she invited me out. I don't remember much of the details, but she ended up canceling on me again. I basically decided to hell with it. I wasn't even upset. We texted a little bit, but the communications really started to die down. I really didn't think much about it and went on with my life. Then one night, I entered the Twilight Zone. One day, I was at the King's Cross area with a friend of mine from the States. He had to make a meeting nearby, so I was by myself in this area. That's when I got a text from Aoife. She asked if I wanted to meet up with her, and I figured, hell, might as well finally meet this girl. I was in the same area of town, 2 steps away, and I didn't see any harm in it. She told me to meet her up in Camden, and she'd be at the Weatherspoons pub at noon. It wasn't a date, at least in the romantic sense, which was good, and at this point, I was really curious as to who she was. I'd literally spent hours talking and texting to this girl, so I don't know Camden that well, and I'm getting texts from her on the way up there as I'm trying to find the Weatherspoons pub and restaurant. It's right by the lock in Camden, by the way. She's telling me she's at work and in the process of selling her share in the bar, but she's on her way. Another friend of hers is at the bar, but he's a great guy, so you'll like him, she said. Again, I was already right here. Might as well meet her friend. That's when I met Reese. Reese was a tall, skinny ginger kid. He was about 21 and had a thick Irish accent. I walked up to him and shook his hand and we got drinks. He seemed nice enough, and for as weird as the situation could potentially be, it wasn't all that uncomfortable. Another one of his friends was there as well. They seemed like 2 nerds in their early 20s. They talked about football and video games and all the other stuff 20-something kids talk about, mixed in with a little bit of politics and a couple of random questions. I'd been in Afghanistan fighting a few years prior, so the situation wasn't anything to be concerned about for me. Then I got a text from Aoife, something along the lines of, "Hey, tied up. Be there in about an hour." Reese seemed nice enough, so we hung out and got a few more beers, and then moved on to the next pub. Still no Aoife. Reese and his friend were nice. We did rounds, and fortunately, I hold my beer pretty well. Another apologetic text from Aoife rolls in. "Screw it, we're drinking," I thought, and we were having a good enough time already. Reese would ask me random questions about Aoife, but I basically shrugged it off to it being one of the only few things we had in common. We bar hopped around Camden and went to the Harley Arms. Redditors may know this bar because it's one of Amy Winehouse's old haunts. At one point, I was in the queue to buy a round of drinks and felt like this guy was way too close to me. I turned around and saw an overweight man with an ugly brown jacket and had a poke-marked face. He had a crucifix tattoo on his neck. In all honesty, a typical barfly you see in any British pub. I said, "Excuse me," and walked past him. We continued to drink and talk the day away. By this time, it was 2:30 or 3, and Aoife was nearing 3 hours late. I decided, forget it, let's go to the Luck Tavern, the bar where Aoife works. Reese and his friends seem cool with it. We get there, and there's 2 Irish tricolor flags above the place. "Yeah, you can tell Aoife owns the place, huh?" Reese said. The part of the story kinda added up. We went into her place, and I text her to tell her we're inside. Oh great, I'm almost done with this. I'll be down in a minute, she texts me, but she never comes down. This is when the story gets really weird. The other guy is named Pete, shows up and shakes Reese's hand, and Reese says, "Oh, you're here to meet Eva?" Keep in mind that Aoife and Eva are almost identical names. I look at Reese and he's like, this may seem weird. Eva is Aoife's best friend. Now this seemed really weird, but I needed to figure out what was going on. These two girls have almost exactly the same name, and I've never heard Aoife mention Eva before. I start talking to Pete, and Reese starts asking similar questions to him about Eva, and he was asking me about Aoife, but some of these questions were getting more serious. He was asking him things like, "Do you love her?" Pete's story then starts to sound eerily similar to mine. Pete meets Eva online. She's from North Ireland, has a daughter named Rosen. In his version, she's 12. He tried to meet up with her a few times, but it fell through. He was invited last minute to hang out with her today. Oh crap, so weird is all I could think. Something wasn't right. At this point, I knew that someone was probably getting played. Probably me. And I was in some kind of game, but I needed to figure out what exactly was going on. Pete and I started to figure out things right about the same time and right in front of Reese, who stuck his guns on the story remarkably well. They both have similar names. They both have daughters that are around the same age with a really common Irish name. I'm not buying it. Neither is Pete. I decide that the pub we're in might not be friendly territory, and I don't want to get shanghaied in Camden. So I suggest we leave. Aoife sends me a text saying she's almost on her way down. Great, I said. Meet us up the street at some other pub. Pete and I start walking out. On the way out, I ask the bartender, "Hey, is Aoife working today?" He responds, "No mate, Aoife hasn't worked here in 3 years." At this point, I know something really creepy is going on. We head to the next pub. I think Pete might be a victim in this game too, but he might not be. He for sure can't be trusted. Reese and his buddy are suspect as well, but I don't have any proof yet, and my curiosity is keeping me there. We walk into another pub. Reese's friend says something to Reese, and I don't hear it. Neither does Pete. Reese loses it. He yells at his friend, and his friend basically says, "F you, I'm out," and takes off. Pete and I are still trying to put things together. I find a table on an outdoor deck. It's quiet. I can think, and I can piece this together. It's amazing how fast you can sober up when you're in trouble. I asked Pete if he has any pictures of Eva, and Pete pulls out his phone and shows me a picture of what I'd seen before. Wait, that's Rosen, Aoife's daughter. No mate, that's Eva, Pete replies. This is making no sense. I've been sent the same picture of the same girl and been told this is Aoife's 14-year-old daughter. In the picture was the girl and a guy. Eva told Pete that the guy was the girl's ex, and Aoife told me that he was Rosen's boyfriend. I showed Pete pictures that I had of Aoife. He claimed he'd never seen the girl in the photos before. Reese was sticking to his story that I had pictures of Aoife, and Pete had pictures of Eva. He also kept claiming that Aoife and Eva texted him and said they were on their way. That's when it dawned on me. I simply looked at Pete and asked, "What number do you have in your phone for Eva?" Pete reads the number on his phone, and it turns out to be the exact same number I have for Aoife in my phone. If all the other clues hadn't add up, this one sent me over the edge. It also sent Pete out of the bar as he literally jumped over a table and ran out of the door in a panic. It was actually quite the sight to see. At this point, it was just me and Reese. I don't think that he had overheard that we both had the same number for someone that he was telling me were two separate girls. Reese said that Aoife and Eva had texted him and that they're on their way again. I don't know who Aoife or Eva are at this point, or if they even exist. So I basically tell Reese I think he's playing some kind of messed up game, and that he's more than suspect of wrongdoing. He took offense to this and physically threatened me. He wasn't a big dude and knew if he stepped to me, it wasn't gonna end well for him. I basically walked right through him, knocking him into the door frame and tore out of the bar. I headed straight for the subway. I needed to jump on the northern line and get home. I wasn't waiting for anything. At this point, I have no idea what the hell was going on. At best, I'd been in some weird catfish scam. At worst, I could have been kidnapped or killed. I get on the subway and there's a guy right behind me. I look at him. He's overweight, pockmarked face, brown jacket. We make eye contact. I look at his neck and there's a crucifix tattoo. It was the same guy from that bar earlier, Harley Arms. I'm a bit worried, but I've been under worse pressure before in my life. I calmly sat down on the subway. The subway was being held in Camden for some reason and wasn't moving. That's when who hops on the same carriage as the two of us? Reese. I could have sworn he made eye contact and just gave a nod to the man in the brown jacket. At this point, I played dumb and pretend like I didn't see them. On the London tube, there's a certain dinging noise that's made right before the doors close. I waited to hear that noise, then bolted out of the door. I ran around and doubled back on the subway several times. When I finally got back near home, I texted a friend in New Cross and told her I was scared I was being followed. She was having a party that night and invited me over. I really didn't want to head home alone. At this point, I think I doubled back and switched lines enough that if Reese and the man in the brown coat were following me, I'd lost them. I made it to New Cross safe and sound. I had a few calls from Aoife the next few days, but I never wanted to answer them. She also sent a few texts saying we needed to talk. Eventually, she stopped calling and texting altogether. I have a few theories on the whole issue. One of my friends think that Reese and Aoife were the same person. I wouldn't rule it out, but the person I talked to on the phone definitely sounded like a woman. Anyway, I thought I'd share. To those of you who are dating online and meeting someone sketchy, be safe about it. Never let your curiosity get to you like it did to me. If there's anyone out there who has any idea what was going on, feel free to share or play your theories off me. I am still baffled by the whole thing. Around March of 2014, I started talking to this girl on Tinder. She seemed cool and fun. After about a week of talking, she suggested we meet up in person. She invited me over to this coffee shop, and I accepted. However, the day of, she started messaging me saying she had to tell me something. Her pictures on Tinder weren't actually of her, and yes, she was a guy. He claimed he really liked talking to me though, and begged me to stay and meet up with him still. Naturally, I declined and blocked his profile and continued on with my life. About a week later, I started talking to another girl. Once again, she seemed cool and fun, and we hit it off. She asked me if I spoke to people on Tinder frequently, and rather stupidly, I told her about my previous encounter with the man lady. Weeks later, I realized this new girl was the same girl as the week before. She asked me if I wanted to meet up with her, and I said sure, as long as we could meet in a public place. We decided on coffee the next day, and I sat at a table waiting. 5, 10, 15 minutes had passed and she was nowhere to be found. I then peered out of the window and saw from across the street a man staring at me intently. I looked away, waited a few seconds, and looked back. He was still standing there staring. At this point, I left the cafe and got onto my bike. I always bike everywhere instead of drive, and booked it home. I was definitely a little freaked out, but still tried to pull myself together and reason that no one could have followed me. I then deleted my Tinder profile and things were normal for a few weeks. About 3 weeks later, I started getting phone calls. The numbers all showed up as unknown. I picked up the first few times to some guy breathing heavily into the phone. I was already a little freaked out. After about a day, I stopped picking up any call unless it displayed the caller's name. I then started receiving texts. At first, they were pretty harmless, calls for attention and begging me to meet them in person. Then it changed to weirder text until eventually the messages became threatening, and whoever was messaging me started throwing my family and friends' names and whereabouts. saying he or she would get them involved unless I answered. Also, because he or she was texting me, I could see a displayed number, but when I called phone providers, they told me the number could not be traced, and it was probably a track phone. Great. I waited about 2 weeks, not responding to the text, thinking I should not feed the troll, but eventually it became too much. I started getting upward of 50 texts and phone calls a day. I'd wake up to 10 to 20 texts every morning. I decided to change my number altogether. The texting and calls stopped for a while, but sure enough, it started happening again. I called my phone provider asking if they ever gave out numbers at a user's request. They said their policy stated that they wouldn't/couldn't unless valid identification was provided. Then one day, I tried logging into my Facebook, but was declined. Within a day, friends started contacting me saying what the hell was I doing, saying they were getting terrible messages from my account. In particular, one of my girlfriends was receiving messages about her mom who died years ago. I apologized profusely and told everyone what was going on. I contacted Facebook and explained the situation. They helped me access my account again, at which point I deactivated it for a while. Enough was enough. I decided to contact the FBI, explain what happened, and what had been going on for over a month now. They documented everything, but told me since I or any of my relatives/family were in no immediate danger, they probably wouldn't be able to do anything. At that point, I felt stuck. I thought about hiring a private investigator or a hacker, but decided against it, however, and just hoped it would fade out if I never answered. I left my Facebook deactivated, ignored any text or phone calls. I never had any trouble at home, but some of my closest friends received the occasional texts as well, which weirdest us all out. I hated that they got dragged into it. One day, I came home and a few things felt very eerie. The door unlocked, windows open, and no one home. A strong breeze running through the apartment. I checked the place and found nothing else weird, so I locked up everything and just waited for my roommates to get home. It's been almost 7 months now. The calls and texts have more or less stopped. I'll get an occasional text, but at most one every 2 weeks. At the peak of it, I was receiving almost 100 texts a day. It definitely affected my social/personal life. I became much more weary of the people around me and my surroundings. I just felt like I couldn't really focus on anything until this stopped. Work was difficult, though I tried to maintain my composure as best as I could. Everything was just weird. Life was weird. I've since stopped using all forms of dating apps/websites. Things are getting back to normal, and at this point, I just want to put it all behind me. I'm moving at the end of this year, so it'll be nice to have a fresh start at my new place. I'm not going to sit here and say all dating apps are dangerous and no one should use them, but definitely cover your bases. Ask more questions before meeting someone. FaceTime them first. Skype, anything. I was naive about it, and I regret it. Be safe, stick to your close friends, and try meeting people in more traditional ways. Weird Tinder stalker, let's not meet.